In this video, we are going to talk about multiplying fractions, but more than just giving you the rote, memorized procedure for how to multiply fractions, I want to help you understand conceptually what it actually means when we multiply a number by a fraction or we multiply a number by a whole number. So let's look at that. First, let's talk about what multiplication is. Multiplication is repeated addition. So when I say 3 times 5, what I really mean is 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, 5 times. I'm repeating that same addition 5 times, and to do it faster, we just use this sign and say 3 times 5, okay, which we all know is 15. But how do we do that when we're working with fractions? Well, when we show multiplication as repeated addition, we can use an array. With that 3 times 5 example, we would have seen 3 dots repeated in 5 different rows, or a 3 by 5 rectangle, okay? Because we're working with fractions, we need to work with partial quantities. So let's look at our first example and how we apply the whole number and how we apply the partial quantity. Our first example is 4 times 2/3. So what we're trying to do is write 2/3 4 times. We have 4 pink rectangles that represent the whole number. Then you'll notice I've subdivided each rectangle with two purple lines. Those 2 purple lines break it into groups of 3, or thirds. How many thirds do we want to select? Well, we want to select 2/3 each time. That yellow shading of 2 of the thirds represents our numerator. So we have 2/3, 2/3, 2/3, and 2/3. Each of these little drawings shows me 2/3 of a whole, but we want to look at 4 times 2/3. So mathematically, what we end up doing is realizing that 4 is the same thing as 4 wholes. Those are our 4 pink rectangles. And we realize that 2/3 just means we select 2 of them in each one. That's the yellow shading. Now we multiply. We say, how many thirds do I have in total? Well, let's count. 2, 4, 6, 8, right? 2 times 4 is 8. So we have 8 thirds total. Or if we want to regroup it into a mixed number, you should always write your answers as a simplified mixed number. We regroup these 2/3 to create 2 wholes and 2/3 left over, or 2 and 2/3. So 4 times 2/3 is the same as 2 and 2/3. Notice we use times to remember that we're repeating the same number multiple times. In our next example, we have 5 times 1/2. So we're going to be looking at 5 1/2s. Here I have 5 circles to represent the 5 wholes. And each of those circles is subdivided by 1 purple line into 2 groups. Each of those groups is a half, right? And we have one of those halves shaded in each circle. So here we've noticed 5 is the same thing as 5 wholes, so we can always write it over 1. That's our pink circles. 1/2 means I've selected 1 out of every 2 pieces. And I look at how many halves I have altogether. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times 1 is 5, so I have 5 total halves. 5 halves is the same as 2 wholes. You can imagine these 2 circles colliding to make 1, and these 2 circles colliding to make another one. So that's 2 wholes, and then there's 1 little half left over. 2 and 1/2. This is how we can show multiplication as repeated addition when we are multiplying by a whole number. Watch out. This method is too hard to do when you're working with 2 fractions. So now let's move on and see how we can conceptualize multiplication when we're working with 2 fractions. The multiplication sign can also be read as the word of. So instead of thinking of it as times, we're going to say of in this section. When multiplying a quantity by a fraction, we take that portion of the other factor. So let's look at the first example. We're trying to find half of 6/7. So the first thing I do is draw a model that has 7 total pieces with only 6 of them selected. You'll notice there is a pink dot in each of those selected blocks of my bar model. So 6 of the blocks have a dot, and those are my 6/7 that I've selected. Now I want to choose half of them. So now we just have to think, what is half of 6? Half of 6 is 3, so we have 3/7. Mathematically, we can see this as 1 over 2 times, or of, 6 over 7. We see that 6 and 2 have common factors, so we can pre-simplify. If you need a special video on that, please leave me a comment below so I know to make a more specific video about pre-simplifying. But right now, I'm just going to assume you understand. So now we are doing 1 times 3 for our numerator and 1 times 7 for our denominator, and we get 3/7, which is exactly what we can see in the picture here. 3/7 is half of 6/7. That should make sense, okay? Remember, we can think of those sevenths as apples, right? If I had 6 apples, half of my apples are 3 apples. It's the same concept there. So now we're going to multiply a fraction by a mixed number. This time, we want to find 1/3, okay, 1 out of every 3 parts, of 2 1/4. 1/3 of 2 1/4. So the first thing I did was draw 2 1/4. I drew 3 holes, and I knew I had both of these holes completed because of the whole number 2. And in this hole, I only made a dot, a pink dot, to select 1 of the fourths. Later, I traced 4 pink dots in each of these holes because we know 4/4 make up a whole. It's in the name. When I put it together, I think 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. That gives me 1 whole. So I'm now multiplying 1/3 times 2 1/4, or 1/3 times 9 quarters. First, I ask myself, how many quarters are in 2 1/4? Well, there's 4 here, 4 here, and 1 more there. So I've got 9 quarters to play with. And now I need to find 1/3 of those. Once again, I pre-simplify so that I'm just multiplying 1 times 3 and 1 times 4. This makes the multiplication really easy for us. And we get 3/4, right? I had 9 quarters. 1/3 of 9 is 3. And those 3 that I have are really these 3 pink dots. Remember, each of those pink dots stood for 1/4. So 1/3 of 2 1/4 is 3/4. If we add those up 3 more times, we should be able to go back and get our result here of 2 1/4. Okay, this has been a little video to introduce you to the concept of multiplication of fractions as times. When we're multiplying a whole number by those fractions, we repeat it that many times. And multiplications as of, showing a portion of another number through multiplication. I want to just highlight for you, remember that for our method in each case, we multiplied across the numerators and across the denominators, simplifying as we go. So the process for multiplication isn't that tricky, but sometimes getting in our head what we actually mean when we say 1/3 of 2/4 can be a little bit challenging. All right, so thank you so much for watching, and check out the next video. This was multiplying fractions.